Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Audit, Risk and Assurance Committee of the SPA. My name is Mary Pitt-Caithley. I'm a board member and I'm the chair of this committee, and welcome everybody today. We have a few people attending from other organisations. Obviously, we have a number of representatives from Police Scotland here, but I won't name all of them. But we have from HMICS, Tina Yule and Alan Wright, from Grant Thornton, Joanne Brown, and from BDO, Claire Robertson. So you're all very welcome to attend the meeting. And we start with any apologies. I have no apologies from any board member. I think everybody that's on the committee is here. But are there any declarations of interest? No, thank you very much. And so the first item of business is 1.3, and that's the minute of the meeting that we had on the 7th of November of 2023. And that's there for approval as a true record of the meeting. Everybody comfortable with that? Okay, thank you very much. And then we have the action log at item 1.4. Now, is everybody comfortable with the recommendations that we have, which is to close 1, 2, 3, 4 items and to keep 2 open? Grant, you wanted to come in.
Yes, thank you. It's one action. It's 2023-0331 recompliance. There seems to be a fair amount still to do to do a prototype before uploading all records into a national database. So I wondered if it was a little premature to close it until that has developed and is working well.
Yes, would members be comfortable keeping that one open until then? Okay, I think that's very helpful. Thanks, Grant. We'll do that. We'll keep that one open. Okay, so that's the final one on the action log. Thank you. Now, Grant, could I ask, if I get thrown off this meeting for any reason, would you be happy to take over as chair?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hope there are no problems.
Hope there aren't. Yeah. Well, we've all managed to get on stream, so that's online, so that's good. We'll hopefully not get thrown out. We're required to consider whether we want to take items 6 to 8 on the agenda in private. Are members minded to take these items in private? Yep. Okay, thank you very much. In which case, having got rid of the standing items, we're now moving straight to item 3.3, which is the annual external audit plan. We're taking this out of sequence because Joanne Brown from Grant Thornton has to leave us. So we go straight to that one, and I'll hand over to you, Joanne.
Thanks, Chair, and that's appreciated. I'm sorry for messing your agenda around.
Not at all. Not at all.
Just by brief introduction, and Rebecca will pick up on the key points, but members will be familiar with the style and content of our external audit plan. We have worked with the finance team and management to reflect on lessons learned from last year's audit and what improvements both teams want to make as we continue to work together for 23-24. And the main change really in the plan is we've taken the opportunity to review materiality. Now we're into the second year of the audit. And Audit Scotland have also removed the cap on trivial, which they capped originally at 250,000. So there's now flexibility for how we calculate that cap, and that's set out in the plan. But I'll let Rebecca pick up the key points, and more than happy to pick up questions.
Thank you. Rebecca.
Thank you. So good morning, everyone. So we completed our planning and risk assessment work over the November to December period, which has allowed us to produce this audit plan for you today. So I'm just going to go through some of the key things in the plan just to draw your attention to. So as Joe mentioned, materiality has increased from the prior year. So prior year, it was based on roughly about 1.2% of your operating expenditure. And this year we have increased that to 1.7%, resulting in a materiality at the planning stage of around 24.9 million. This increase is due to the fact that this is a second year audit. So normally you will see a much lower materiality figure within the first year as we get to know the entity and your control environment. Secondly, there has been an increase due to the work that we've done around the control environment, and we think that there are good controls in place. And looking at last year, there were minimal misstatements and control findings in the prior year. The ones that we did identify were isolated issues that we wouldn't expect to reoccur again in this year. For example, the pensions prior period adjustment from last year. As Jo also mentioned, the other change to materiality is that Audit Scotland no longer are mandating a trivial threshold cap, which was previously 250,000. So that's the cap that we use to report all misstatements identified above that level to those charged with governance. So we have therefore set the triviality cap at 5% of materiality, which has resulted in a trivial figure of 1.2 million. So we will be reporting any misstatements above that level to yourselves. And all of that is detailed in page 8 of the report or page 11 of the agenda pack. Moving on to the significant risks to the audit. So these are not new this year, so you'll probably recognise these from the prior year. We have a significant risk over management override of controls, which is a presumed risk for all entities. We also have a significant risk over the valuation of land and buildings, and that's inherently due to the size of that figure within your accounts, and also the inherent risk of error and judgment applied to the assumptions within that estimate. We also have a significant risk over the valuation of the pension liability, and that is for similar reasons. This year we have rebutted the risk of fraud in relation to income recognition due to the fact that income is mainly derived from Scottish Government grant, and therefore it is a bit more difficult to perpetrate fraud in that area. So we've not identified a significant risk there. And also we've rebutted the risk of expenditure recognition due to the fact of the expenditure streams. Most of that relates to payroll, which again, we've identified that there's a good control environment in place, and therefore the risk of fraud in that area is low. Moving on to wider scope and best value, we've identified one significant risk which relates to financial sustainability. This is similar to the risk that was identified last year, so we will be looking particularly at what plans are in place to deliver financial sustainability in the medium to longer term, while still tackling with the one-year funding settlements. Although no significant risks were found in the other areas of wider scope, there are a few areas of interest that we will be looking at this year, including governance and the change of leadership at Police Scotland, as well as succession planning for upcoming rotations of board appointments at the SPA as well. And then in terms of use of resources, we're also interested in the programme to establish transformation and change, which in some parts link to the ability to deliver financial sustainability. So we'll be looking at the arrangements in place to deliver and implement these large-scale transformation programmes. In terms of other audit matters, every second year Audit Scotland produce a National Fraud Initiative report based on returns collated from auditors. So we will be completing a return for Audit Scotland this year based on the arrangements in place to comply with the NFI requirements. The plan also highlights the expected timeline for delivery of the year-end audit, so that's detailed in the plan. And then page 20 of the report, or page 23 of the agenda pack, outlines the proposed audit fees for the 23-24 audit. And the appendices to the report outline our responsibilities to you as your auditors and confirms our independence for the 23-24 audit. So those are the main things that I wanted to cover, but happy to take any questions that you have.
Thank you very much, Becca. That was helpful. I was going to ask you to explain the reasons for the materiality, but I think you've done that in your presentation. So thank you very much. Grant, you wanted to come in? Grant, I think you're muted.
Apologies. Thank you for explaining the change in materiality, and I understand the reason for that. I wondered if you could just clarify, is this the new threshold that you've arrived at for this year's audit? Is that likely to be around the same sort of level that you're going to operate for the rest of the appointment, or is it something that's reviewed annually based on other factors?
So materiality is an ongoing assessment, so we are always reflecting on materiality. When we get to the year end, we'll again reflect on materiality, looking at, I guess, your accounts and movements and anything else that knowledge that we've gained throughout the year. So at the moment, that's where it is as part of planning, but that could change if something comes up in terms of looking at the controls or any issues that arise as we go through our audit. We can choose to reduce that materiality level. So again, any changes in materiality we will report to you as part of the annual audit report.
Okay.
Typically we operate a benchmark of up to 2% across our public sector entities, and that's the maximum we would use. So we're at 1.7, so a bit closer to that 2%. But as Rebecca says, we'll continue to review it, and I expect the cap on trivial just to no longer come back. So that will automatically always be the 5% of whatever that materiality figure is that we determine each year.
Right, thank you. So in broad terms, it's reviewed annually and it might go up to 2% depending on circumstances, but it's in the sort of ballpark range that we've been talking about.
Yeah, I think to be honest, when you actually look at the difference between 1.7 and 2, it doesn't take out much or bring much more into scope, and it doesn't fundamentally change our sample sizes. But it could be up as high as 2%, but we'll probably sit round about 1.7 each year, dependent on any risk factors that you have.
Okay, thank you very much for clarifying. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other members got questions? I wondered if you could explain why there might be additional costs to the SPA for audit work on pensions this year.
So that's something that we've just flagged within the audit plan, and within the audit plan itself, we also just flag any potential overruns due to delays on audit working papers or the quality of the financial statements, which didn't cause us any issue in prior years. Your pensions, they're complicated. It's big numbers. When we calculated our baseline fee as part of our tender submissions to Audit Scotland, that was based on a sort of standard central government body. Clearly, there's more work involved in your pensions than necessarily across other central government entities, but that's just something that we've flagged as a potential. We had additional work last year due to IFRIC 14. We're not expecting that same level of work, and we're expecting the Audit Scotland pension protocol, that's looking like it will be the same in terms of the pension funds communicating with us, but they've brought the timeline earlier on that. So in the consultation document, it's suggesting that those pension fund auditor responses should be with us by the end of August. So if everybody delivers to that timeline, we shouldn't have that same challenge that we had in the prior year around the pension fund auditor correspondence with us. So it's just a placeholder. It's just based on how we calculated as part of our sort of Audit Scotland tender submission baseline fees, and why that they may vary up or down. But that's something, if that was to happen, we'd have an early discussion with John on, and we'd reach an agreement on it.
Thank you very much. Any other comments or questions on this report? I mean, it's a significant programme of work ahead, but it was helpful and reassuring to hear you say there are good controls in place in various parts of the organisation, so that's good. Hopefully we have a smooth process through this plan, and we'll see you in September, if not before. So thank you very much. Okay. Moving on then, we go back to the start of the agenda, and item 2.1 is the internal audit update, and Claire Robertson from BDO is here to present that report along with John McNellis. John or Claire, which one of you is going to start off?
I think I'll just pass straight to Claire on this one.
Okay, thank you. Claire.
So we had 4 reports scheduled to come to this meeting. Unfortunately, 2 of those reports are still at draft report stage, awaiting management responses. And for one of those reports, the middle office reform project, the fieldwork is taking a bit longer than expected due to there being more teams and more stakeholders involved in that process than was anticipated at the planning stage. So there have been some delays this quarter, unfortunately. The report that we do have to discuss today is on new legislation, which we'll talk about under separate cover, and we'll also present the draft internal audit plan at this meeting. Our follow-up results are also included within this progress report, and this quarter of the 39 recommendations followed up. only 4 were fully implemented, but a further 15 were partially implemented. 17 were not yet implemented, and for 2, there wasn't evidence available to test yet, just because the process that's been changed hasn't been operated yet. That's it for the progress report. On the delayed fieldwork one, we have had a session to think about what we could do to prevent further delays, and we think we just need to do like a little bit more work at the scoping stage to make sure we've identified all the teams and stakeholders that we'll need to engage with, and then maybe think about splitting the fieldwork into 2 sessions for some of the larger audits, in order that we've got enough time to coordinate the different teams that need to get involved. But on the whole, the plan is kind of tracking roughly where it's supposed to be, but that one has just presented some unanticipated delays.
Okay, thank you, Claire. Any members got any questions or comments? Grant.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Claire, that's a very helpful explanation of where you are. Just to explain why I'm particularly interested in one of the reports that's not yet finalised, it's the one on budget setting and investment prioritisation. I'm on one of the groups that's looking at the budget process, and of course we're very, as you'll understand, we're very keen to finalise our budget in the course of this month before, and March, before the start of the new year. I wonder if there are going to be there's likely to be any progress in at least knowing what your recommendations are before we actually get to the final stages of the budget approval process, so that we can incorporate these in our own thinking, even though it's the report is not yet finalised.
Claire, did you wish to come back?
The report is currently at draft report stage, so in terms of our findings, I don't anticipate that they will change. So I imagine they could be shared in draft form. As the part that we're waiting for is the management responses to those findings.
Okay. Lynn, did you wish to come in now?
Yes, if I may, I was going to come in a general point around where we are in the different audits and how we're taking it forward. But I'll maybe come back to the question that Grant asked and Claire's touched on. I have seen the draft, Grant, on the budget setting. I think there's 6 areas of good practice and 1 minor area around training. So I don't think there's anything to be learned from that and how we do our budget setting. In terms of the other side of it, which is capital investment, what I would say is that it will resonate with your own views and what your committee has been asking for a while. So I don't think there's anything there to be concerned about, and it will be very helpful. But in actual revenue budget setting, I've seen the draft. I don't think there's any concerns there. If I could just come to the general point, which is, it is a new audit. I think the first number of audits have been quite complex. I think Claire would agree. They've gone widely across Police Scotland. They weren't discrete areas. That brings its own challenges in terms of planning it and getting responses. And I've asked that a meeting set up with the GCC Spears and myself and the relevant teams that are involved in the management of the audit, so we can ensure that our internal auditor gets the responses they need within the timeframes that suits the committee. What I would say, Chair, is that we will probably have to have a special ARAC committee just to look at these reports. I would like them looked at before May. I think that's too far away, and we will get that put in place. So there are plans to push it forward, and as I said, for Grant, no concerns around the budget setting that I can see for going forward.
Right.
Thanks.
Thank
Very
you.
much, Lynn.
That's very helpful. That's very reassuring. That I just wanted to be aware of anything that might impact on our deliberations. So thank you very much.
And I think on the general point of missing reports and only 1 out of 4 that we'd anticipated being here, I think it is important that we learn lessons from that. So from what you're saying, Claire and Lynn, we are looking at how we can make sure this doesn't happen regularly, and we get reports when we anticipate them. If we do need to have a special meeting, we can look at that, and we can make arrangements to do that. So would it be your expectation, Claire, that the reports would be available, say, for a meeting in March or April rather than waiting till May?
Yes, definitely. That'd be our preference too.
Yeah, that would be very helpful. I think we wouldn't want to see it go beyond that, really. So thank you very much. Any other comments or questions? Any other member want to come in? No, well, thank you very much for that. And we're moving then to item 2.2, which is the Police Scotland Audit and Improvement Recommendation Tracker for Q3, and that's DCC Spears, who was on the screen a moment ago. Hello, Alan.
I'm still here, Chair.
Yeah.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, folks. Thanks again for your time. I'll make some introductory comments, and I've got my team round about me, which is fantastic. So Donna has done a huge amount of work, you will see from the report, and I'll just in a couple of minutes pass over to her for some comments. I think I made a similar comment at the last audit committee that the volume of recommendations that we're considering just now reflects in a positive way the level of scrutiny that's going on within Police Scotland, and probably over the last couple of committees we've seen a really significant increase in the number of open recommendations. So from Donna's report, you will see that we currently have over 340 recommendations that are open, and since we last met, a further 107 recommendations have been added. The ones that have been added, I think, are fair to say, fall into the territory of independent reviews. And if I picked one of those, the ICO inspections in 2023 relate to 65 of those recommendations, and we will come on and talk about them just in a little bit. I think what I would draw out, Chair, and members will have seen it as well, is that the number of recommendations closed in the last quarter are relatively small. Only 17 recommendations were closed. I've had a closer look at that, and there is a proportion of that being down to the time of year, and if there's any quarter in the year where the number of recommendations that are closed is lower than it is in that particular quarter. Probably the area where my team are spending an awful lot of focus just now is on those recommendations which are delayed, and currently we have 77 recommendations which are delayed, and probably a greater number than ordinarily we'd have seen in previous committees than I would want to see. You can be assured that our Audit and Risk Board is looking closely at those delayed recommendations, ensuring that we're making as much progress as we can, and that the timescales that we're setting are as realistic as they possibly can be. Those 77 recommendations, again, are spread across 23 business areas within Police Scotland, so very, very broad. And there are one or two areas where there are a larger number of recommendations that are outstanding. For example, hate crime, the working in around the RDU, and organisational learning. So ordinarily we would see one or two recommendations that would be delayed in an area. Here we're seeing a couple of areas where there are more significant number. What I would say in a positive way is that there is, in a lot of ways, significant progress to address those recommendations, and a lot are in the space of we are just in the final steps to get sufficient evidence to demonstrate that the work has been done in those recommendations. I think with your indulgence, Chair, I'll pass over to Donna, and then we can obviously open the conversation up from there. I'm also conscious that there are quite a number of colleagues from Police Scotland on the call this morning, so a number of people will be able to contribute if the questions are in specific areas. So if you're content, I'll just ask Donna to go into a little bit more detail in the report.
Yes, very happy with that, Donna.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Yes, so as the DCC says, there's 17 recommendations that we were able to close. This quarter, that was 7 in relation to internal audit, 2 in relation to HMICS, and 9 independent recommendations. Of those that we added 107 new recommendations, which is probably the highest number that we've ever added, but that is on account of one publication in particular, the ICO recommendations were significantly adding to those. You'll have also noted that we reopened 5 recommendations. They are from the annual audit that Grant Thornton report on. So we treat those recommendations slightly differently from all our other recommendations, where we get an immediate answer from HMICS or we do a quarterly review with our internal auditor, we have to wait until the next audit to find out if the auditor is going to accept those for closure. So I can tell you from those 5 recommendations that were reopened, they were not reopened because we hadn't taken any action. It was just the result or the outcome or the risk is still live in that area. So just to give you an example for some assurance, we had a business benefits recommendation that you know that we have a process in place, we just don't have those projects in the pipeline to demonstrate its effectiveness. The strategic workforce plan was approved in December, so that didn't meet the cut-off point for this audit, and our best value arrangements. So we are obviously still progressing with developing our arrangements for best value within the organisation. So that covers those 5 that have been reopened. I also mentioned the 7 that we have in the pending state. So these are recommendations where we've taken all reasonable steps to take action on them, but we're waiting on the final result or outcome to demonstrate the change or the positive impact that they've had. So we track those, excuse me, separately, just so that we can show that there has been quite a lot of activity in that area. There's 12% of the total recommendations have a very high or high risk, and that includes the 5 high risk which relate to the compliance audit and the RDU audit, of which they are all still remaining open. And we pay particular attention to those and we get monthly updates in relation to those. And as the DCC mentioned, in relation to those delays, we do interrogate those really quite significantly each quarter. We're always looking for opportunities where we can progress them. We do an assessment on the amount of work that has been undertaken to make sure that we're not just sort of dragging our feet, if you like. We are actually continuing to make progress, and in the majority of cases, most of them can be implemented if given sufficient time to do so and to be able to demonstrate that an outcome has been achieved. I've provided some additional information in relation to the trends. So better practice continues to be the category where most of our recommendations fall into, and that is reserved for us, our continuous improvement type activity. There's no failings, there's no gaps or non-compliances, but we can do better. And I've also provided an age profile of the breakdown of the recommendations, and you'll be able to see that the majority have been made in the last 2 years. And I think that's all I would say. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Okay, thank you very much, Donna. Yeah, before I open it up to questions from members, I think it's important to think about why we have this report. We have it so that we can be sure that there is a process in place for tracking progress in relation to completing improvements and overtaking recommendations, but also so that we can assess whether or not we're continually improving. So it's just as important to us that what has been recommended is completed and is showing and giving us assurance that we're using that to improve what we're doing. So I think it's important that we stop and think about, did the recommendation do what was required? Has the action that we've taken given us confidence that that will improve what we're doing? So I think if we think about the recommendation tracker, just not so much just in terms of the numbers and the percentages, but actually what has been the value of doing all of that work. But I'm sure members have got questions about this specific report. So number 1 on my screen is Grant, and then Paul.
Thank you very much, Chair. Donna, and Alan, a very helpful explanation as to where we are. I'd like to just home in on the pending one, which is on page 6 of your pack, the benefits realisation. Through the Resources Committee over quite a long time, we've looked at the business cases that are presented, and one of the key things that's in most business cases is the expected benefits that are going to emerge, whether they be cash or non-cash. So we've been very interested to see how these are being monitored and reported, and I know that there's a flow through into the Performance Committee as to how it all flows through. The way you've described it in this paper is that the date for achieving evidence of benefits realization is unknown. So I wonder if you could put a bit more flesh in that as to is the issue that you're not capturing the right information, or it's not actually then being rolled forward into some sort of report that explains what actual benefits achieved compare with those that were envisaged at the outline, either the initial or final business cases.
Okay, I certainly can provide a little bit more of an explanation in relation to those. The benefits realisation recommendations are connected. So there are two recommendations, and the first one, which is about the activity. So we need to be able to show that we have a process in place to track the FTE savings that we're making and showing what the performance impact of those savings is. So at this current time, we don't have any projects that we're able to show in terms of our metrics to demonstrate that we've got that process in place. But what we have done is we have done a lot of work between the change team and the analysis and performance teams. They have been working collaboratively. So when any new project starts, they're starting to attribute metrics and measures to the benefits so that we can track them and confidently show at a later date that as a result of moving this FTE resource here, this is the impact, this is the improvement that it's had. So it's more about the measurement, which I think most people here will find that is incredibly difficult. We've got a huge amount of projects. Not all of them have significant FTE savings that we can confidently say as a result of saving these FTEs. We've moved them over here and we're doing more of X. So it's extremely complex, but it's something that we're constantly monitoring to see if there's any new opportunities to show the process that we've designed if it works in practice. So hopefully that explains it.
Thanks, Donna. I don't underestimate the challenge. It's a matter of being quite clear at the outset what you're looking for, and then tracking, are you there or are you not there? It just seems to have been something that's been taking rather a long time to make some inroads into it. And clearly it's been mentioned by our external auditors and by our internal auditors as well. So I think when we don't have the date is unknown on page 6, I think it would be helpful if at perhaps our next meeting, you could put a little bit more of a timeline onto when we might see even some tentative or trial or preliminary route through to sampling this to see, is it working or is it not working? And if it's not working because the wrong data is being collected or whatever, or it's not possible to drill into this in more detail, then I think perhaps an alternative way might be worth giving some thought to.
Yes, I can do that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Grant. Paul? Oh, sorry,
yes, thanks.
John McNeil has put his hand up. Is it in relation to that point, John?
Yes, please, Chair.
Paul, if you bear with me for a moment.
It's just a comment that later on when we come to the internal audit plan, we do have an internal audit plan for next financial year that's looking at the implementation of change projects and change benefits. So I think that would be a useful steer to look at this again and what we are doing, and that might give you some resolution and added context to this finding, which has been going on for a while now, and it probably makes sense to have a look at that again.
Okay, thank you, John. Paul, back to you.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Can I ask, you made reference to 107 audit recommendations being very high, and there's 72 independent audits. Can I ask, they also referred to the number of open audits of the red ones, the number of red ones. And is that unusually high as well? Are these of the 107, or is there an awful lot of those red risk ones?
No, there's not a lot of red risk recommendations made from the new recommendations, and the high risks are quite small
Right.
in relation to the total number.
Yeah. And can I also ask, just factually, excuse my ignorance in this, what exactly is an independent review?
Okay. So an independent review is a collective name that we give to anything that isn't internal audit or HMICS, but is made by an external source. So in Appendix B, I do detail all of the publication titles that are categorised under that internal independent review. So it's really just for
It's a catch-all term.
presentation purposes. I can probably break it down on a separate slide, but they're
No, it's just generically, I was just curious because it's I just wanted to get clued up on what you were meaning. The next question I've got is about the 17 recommendations closed.
Yeah.
On reflection, do you think the recommendations, the audits, once they've been through the process and have been completed, have they actually had the impact that was desired when they were open in the first place?
Yes. I can confidently say we don't ever get a recommendation closed or discharged or verified by the internal audit team or HMICS unless we're able to demonstrate that there's been a positive performance outcome. So by and large, the majority of the recommendations are implemented as they are made. There are a small number of occasions where we might take alternative action, and I think we have done that this time in relation to our ICT service delivery, but we are always demonstrating areas where we've taken alternative action that mitigates the risk or substantially contributes to mitigating the risk.
Great, thanks very much. That's
Thank you, Paul. Any other member want to come in at this stage? Okay, thank you. Just on that last point, I mean, clearly, as we said, we want to know that the risks that have been identified are being mitigated, and we've spoken about that. So when we look at the report and we see that there are quite a significant percentage of recommendations have a very high or high risk status attached to them. Can I check, are these in particular given priority when you're doing the work on these?
Yes, we do have a more intense focus on those to make sure that we can move those along more quickly. But yes, they do get a more intense scrutiny.
So the 28 recommendations that have that status, they'll be, we could expect to see progress with most of these, can we? Say at the next meeting?
You will, but there will
Good.
likely be more recommendations added that will
there's always more coming along, but yeah, we'd be very keen to see anything with a high risk or very high risk be given that priority. So thank you for confirming that, Donna, that's helpful. Alan, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, just to give you a bit of assurance, Chair, probably our audit and risk board, that's where much of our discussion focuses on, and certainly chairing that group, that's where the energy is placed, is on those, firstly those high risks, but on the areas where we need to make greater progress at a quicker pace. So be assured that will be the focus at the next committee, and we'll be able to give you a substantial update.
That's helpful. Thank you, Alan. Okay, if there's nobody else wishes to come in, then we're moving now to item 2.3, which is the SPA Corporate Strategy and Audit Improvement Recommendations Update. And I'm passing here to John McNellis.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just pull out some highlights as usual of the report. So we have our first part, which is our update on the SPA's corporate strategy for the last quarter and year to date. So within the last quarter, quarter three of the year, we achieved 63% of the milestones that we were looking to do. And overall, for the year to date, that comes together that we've achieved 75%, so 3/4 of what we wanted to do in the year to date. So a good performance, which we continue to be challenged by some resourcing pressures within the SPA, but it still represents a high-performing service. And indeed, in page 2 of the pack, which is page 5 of the overall submission, you can see some examples of the results that we've achieved in the year to date. We're currently working as well on our service plan for the year ahead. And so any of the areas which we've not been able to achieve in the year, we're looking to incorporate in next year's plan as well. The second part of this report, so that's Appendix B, is the equivalent SPA's recommendations tracker. And a couple points to highlight here for yourself. There were 2 HMICS recommendations which have been reopened. These were both from the HMICS review of forensics toxicology. And in both of these cases, the SPA and forensics are content that we've completed the action. However, when we've taken this to HMICS, they've asked for further work or further evidence to be provided to allow them to discharge the recommendation. So they've not been discharged, and we've had to reopen them at this time. And in addition to that, we have 3 recommendations which have been superseded. Now, all 3 of these relate to the ICO recommendations from the SPA's own ICO audit. So you'll see later on the agenda, we have item 4.2. Police Scotland received a very similar ICO inspection, and it effectively made the exact same recommendations as we had within SPA. Now, all of the 3 recommendations relate to IT asset registers. So effectively, Police Scotland provides that overarching service to the police, SPA and forensic services. So we superseded these actions. They're the same ones, and completion of that action by Police Scotland will mitigate the risk for the entire policing service. That's probably all to say just now. I'm very happy to take questions from members. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, John. Any questions from members? John, can I ask, make the same point to yourself? It's really important that we know that when a recommendation's been completed, it's had the desired impact and has addressed the original risk. So how do you go about considering whether or not that's the case, rather than just say, gosh, we've done that, tick?
Yeah, no, it's a very good point, and I would replicate a lot of what Donna would say. You know, when we close the recommendations, again, we go back to the original finding. We're using actually a similar 4 action system to track our benefits. So there's a prompt to think about not just what the recommendation was, but what was the original finding and the original risk, which spurred on that recommendation in the first place. So we have a look at that and say again and challenge yourself, did it have the desired impact? And again, like I say, we have internal audit at HMICS, which test us and hold us to account. The other point that I would probably also ask or say on this, what we've been quite keen to do is link all of our recommendations to our risk registers. So when we complete a recommendation, it's almost a prompt for us to look at where did that sit in terms of addressing a risk within a risk register. And we'll look at the risk to say, because we've done that now, has it had an impact on potentially reducing that risk? So that's also a really good test, I think I would add into that point.
That's helpful. Thanks, John. Lynn, you wanted to come in.
If I may, Chair, and with your indulgence, I'd like to say quite a bit about the HMICS recommendations and the reopening of those recommendations. And I want to say a bit of context on this. First of all, and you've heard throughout this committee, and I think DCC Spears said earlier on around, you know, we go through significant public scrutiny, and as a policing service and oversight board and forensics, and we recognise that, and we value that. And one of the things I'm very keen on is whether there's a recommendation against the SPA, and the terminology is we're hit for it and we can deliver on it. And I do have some concerns as to these reopening of these recommendations. I'd like to explain why. I'd just also like to say, Chair, as you know, my whole background is I trained with the National Audit Office. I know exactly all about audit and inspection, and I value it, but I do have some concerns about one of these reopenings, which I want to address the committee with. So if I start with the 2 that have been reopened, one of them, start with the second one, which was recommendation 17. Now, these recommendations come out of our forensic services, the work that was done by HMICS into the drug driving toxicology. That was a review that we asked for. It was significant, and it was specifically commissioned by ourselves. So we welcome the recommendations. So the first one, number 17, it was about that we should review our functionality and membership of the Forensic Services Committee to provide effective and robust governance, providing an effective platform for Police Scotland, the Crown Procurator Fiscal Service, and the Police Investigations Review Commissioner, PERC, to hold SPA forensic services to account in terms of the quality and delivery of the service provision. Now, in terms of going back to HMICS and saying that we thought this had been addressed, the actions resulting from the recommendation have been taken through the SPA Board Governance Review, which was approved at the authority meeting on the 24th of August, item 9, and made the necessary revisions to the Forensic Services Committee. So our view was we had completed that action. HMICS are saying that they are looking to the October meeting of the Forensics Committee under the new terms of reference, and they'll review that and then seek to give feedback from the external bodies on the newly established principles about performance and service delivery. So that is still open. We're now in February, so I'll be hoping that would be action pretty soon and that we can close that down. I'm just going to stop there, Chair, if there's any questions around that before I get into the next one, which is slightly more complicated and concerns me much more.
Okay, thank you very much, Lynn. Any questions from board members? Any comments? No, thank you for that, and let you move on to the next one.
Okay, now the other recommendation at the time when it was made, I felt it was quite unusual, but you know, we accepted it, and it was recommendation 6, and it was that the SPA and SPA Forensic Services should consider the available evidence in other jurisdictions to assess the opportunities to reclaim forensic services costs, and then work with the Crown Office and the Fiscal and the Government to establish if this is possible in Scottish criminal trials. At the time, Chair, I thought that was really sort of maybe pushing the boundary of what the SPA's remit is, but we accepted it and we did some work on it and we spoke to the relevant bodies. In our submission back to the HMICS, we said that we noted that the recommendation was an investigative research piece into the charging and therefore budgeting model between forensic services and other justice partners, and had actually been the subject of correspondence between the Scottish Government and HMICS. As it appears, the Scottish Government, in their letter to HMICS in July 23, advised that they had no intention of including this in the short or medium-term plans for legislation, and it would need to cover all forensics provision, not just toxicology, and we would like some advice on whether HMICS see a proportionate benefit in aligning resource to this research, or whether the Scottish Government position may allow us to set aside this recommendation. So that was the basis, Chair, on why we went back to the Scottish Government. And we thought it was reasonable for that to be set aside, in the fact that the Government have no intention of introducing any legislation that will allow this to happen. Now, in terms of coming back to us, HMICS have come back and said that they would like wider evidence and potentially a proposal to be made to the Scottish Government and the Fiscal Service in relation to changing the current approach, seeking to discourage egregious challenges to forensic evidence and to reduce the cost of the criminal justice system. I personally feel this is not the role of the SPA. The opportunities are not currently supported by the Scottish Government. However, this is coming from HMICS. They do not preclude the consideration of what happens in other jurisdictions and the possibility of influencing future criminal justice legislation. Now, examples of changing legislation based on research proposal are multiple in number, and they have said that they've resulted in improved legislation elsewhere. So the HMICS are not prepared to set aside this without some further consideration of the opportunities and potential benefits of a change to this approach. My own view, Chair, is I am reluctant to allocate resources to this, and where I have got a challenge in resources within my team, to something that, frankly, the Scottish Government have already ruled out a year ago. And I actually don't think it's the role of the SPA. I think it's the role of maybe a university research project or a policy division within the Scottish Government. So I feel quite strongly about this, Chair, that this recommendation could be open for the millennia, because I cannot see it being closed down by the SPA. I wanted to bring this to your attention today for your view. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lynn. Any members got any comments on that or questions for Lynn? I take it the charging, Lynn, would have involved charging people who were being tested for, say, drug driving, to pay for the cost of that test. Is that what we're talking about?
My understanding is for when people are convicted, so it drives
only if they were
something through the
convicted.
whole of the criminal justice system. That's my understanding, but
Yeah,
I'm happy to get more information for the committee on
Yeah.
that.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not aware of that being the case anywhere else in any other crimes or anything else like that. So, well, yeah. Sorry, Katharina, you wanted to come in, and then Paul.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Lynn, for this, for kind of bringing this to our attention. It is puzzling, I suppose. I suppose I share your concern around this. What definitely comes to mind, I mean, what kind of just jumped out at me is that if HMICS, so I've got one observation, one question. So the observation is, if this is how strong the HMICS feel about this, then it seems to me to indicate that they have some insight into this that, potentially we don't have. So, without kind of being cheeky about this, if they have good insights and they feel so strongly about the viability of this, then, maybe that's something that they could take forward. So not being cheeky about this, but it seems like you have done something, Scottish Government have done something. The party pushing for this seems to be HMICS, so I must assume they must have some information that we don't have, or they seem to think that there is a higher success of that. So that's just a sort of an initial reaction. But the more kind of practical kind of governance position now is, if we are at an impasse, because as I say, I do share your concerns. I think we need to be very, very mindful in terms of how we use our resource, because there are so many other, really high value recommendations made by HMICS that we're trying to progress at pace. So it's this prioritization of resource and allocation of resource appropriately to improvement activity that's most likely to yield an outcome in the short to medium term. So if we are, at this kind of impasse, so to say, where this is, we're minded to do one thing, HMICS, and not minded to kind of close this, I was just wondering what are our governance options? How are we going to, solve this impasse? What's available to us?
Thank you, Katharina. I mean, I assume this would require a report to the board, but Lynn can probably come back in on that.
Yeah, I think it may need a board view at some point on this. As I said, we are very respectful of recommendations from all inspectorates. We do our very best to deliver on them, but we cannot deliver something that we have no responsibility for. And in this area, I don't think we have. And as I said, it's also an unusual use of our resources. So maybe we will need a discussion around the board for the whole board view on this, because I do not take it lightly that I cannot close down a recommendation from an inspection against the SPA.
Thank you, Lynn. You happy with that, Katharina? Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I totally share concerns. As I say, it is a prioritization of resource kind of question. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
Yeah, I mean, I also share evidence for inspectorates, having been a chair of an inspectorate in the past. But yes, this does seem to ride coaching horses through the judicial system. That I don't know anywhere that if you've transgressed, you get the punishment from the court, and then you get a bill later for prosecuting it effectively, which is what this is for gathering the evidence. I mean, maybe others know more about this than me, but this does seem to me to stray into the party political kind of arena, which isn't where SPA sits. This is literally above our pay grades. And I think it's ultra vires. So if this is what they are meaning, so I'd be very uncomfortable if we've closed this off and with this being visited like this. I think it's not sensible, I think.
Thank you, Paul. Grant, you wanted to come in?
Yes, thank you. Just really on top of the comments that my colleagues have already made, I fully support Lynn's concern in this territory. If HMICS believe that this is something that they want to pursue, I'm surprised they're not just doing this directly with Scottish Government to test their appetite or otherwise. There are so many things that are on the action list for agendas for all sorts of different areas that if there's no appetite at Scottish Government level for pursuing this particular path, which could be innovative, I have no idea, I think it's more a dialogue between HMICS and Scottish Government rather than asking us to do things at this stage. When as Lynn has stated, we've got a lot of other things to do, and if there's no appetite at Scottish Government, I really can't see the point in pursuing this route at this point in time.
Thanks, Grant. So I think we need to check that this is still the position of the HMICS, and if it is, then potentially we're looking at asking Lynn to do a report for the board so that we can have a definitive SP position on the matter. So thank you for bringing that to our attention. That dealt with the 2 HMICS recommendations which are reopened, but there were also 3 ICO recommendations which we're noting here as having been superseded. And I wondered if, John, you could tell me how ARAC would gain assurance that these will be addressed, the recommendations that were being put forward have or will be addressed.
Yes, of course. So, like I say, these recommendations are replicated entirely within the Police Scotland's recommendation tracking. So you will see progress reported as part of the report, which Donna talked about earlier. Work with digital development, like recommendation will apply locally over the entire police IT estate. So it's actually quite good. It means we'll all be doing exactly the same thing across the board.
Sounds good. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. We'll keep an eye on that through the tracker report. Now, does anybody have any other comments or questions? Well, thank you for that. It was a good discussion. So we've got item 3.1 as our next report. So it's the internal audit report on new legislation. And Claire, we're back to you.
Okay. So in this a brand new process to assess the impact of new legislation, what we found was that the process should really improve the ability to centrally coordinate, evaluate and cost the impact of legislation changes. Due to how new the process was at the time of the audit, we haven't concluded on the operating effectiveness of the process because it wasn't really fully operational as yet. But what we've done is we've taken a detailed look at the design of the process further. We've concluded limited assurance on the design of the controls around new legislation, notwithstanding that it's an improvement in that coordination in important areas. So the improvements we've recommended relate to obtaining finance stratification of the costings, which are included in the impact assessment, and having a clear methodology for assessing the cost of implementing legislative changes, and also having more detailed people resource assessment included within the impact assessment. We've also made some recommendations around developing more detailed process notes to support are involved in the impact assessment and clear documentation of decision making at LRG. We've received management responses from these, and in areas they're partially agreeing to the recommendations, but we're satisfied with the responses and that the actions management are proposing to take will mitigate the risks that we've identified. So that's all I was going to say about that report, but happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Claire. Katrina, you wanted to come in.
Yes, thank you. One thing I wondered whether you had I have a slight anxiety around the vulnerability of the process, the single point of entry, which you mentioned in your executive summary. And I just wondered what the assurance was that the single point of entry agreed to the Strategic Leadership Board for new legislation is going to include non-policing specific legislation or legislation that includes a policing specific part of it. So the example I'm thinking of is the current learning disability, autism and neurodivergence bill, which is going through a process. But that, because that's actually come to the attention of the Scottish Government police powers. So I just wondered whether you had considered that, because if when that bill gets passed in a couple of years' time, hopefully, that will have a very profound impact in terms of personnel, resourcing, processes, both internally and externally, in terms of Police Scotland's, interactions with the public. So I'm just wondering what the safeguards are to ensure that all the relevant legislation is considered.
That did form a part of our testing. So we were looking at, I guess, what horizon scanning was undertaken and what kind of communication was in place with Scottish Government. So whilst I can't comment specifically on that piece of legislation, I can't remember if that was one that we kind of seen within our testing. I'd be confident that they're looking broadly at all the legislation that may have an impact. That was certainly coming out of our testing, that it was a good process in terms of being able to identify anything that may have an impact and capture that centrally.
You happy
That's
with
great.
that,
Thank you for that
Katrina?
assurance. Thank you very much.
Yeah, that's useful.
Yeah, thank you.
Sorry, Katharina, before I come to you, ACC Middleton, you've put your hand up. Is it in relation to this point?
It
yeah,
is,
if you want to come
yes.
in now, then thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Katrina. Yeah, just to support Claire in what she was saying as well. I suppose there are two parts to this. So there will be the horizon scanning that we conduct internally through the Criminal Justice Policy Division, and they will continue to do that. Rules, I think, may potentially have a touch point into Police Scotland in any way, no matter how small or how extensive. We should pick that up. But the other important aspect of this is that our ask into Policing Division is that they will also be working across departments within government, and that they will very early doors be able to give us the heads up if there's going to be something coming that will then have an impact on us. So it's kind of from 2 points, but as Claire said, it's a brand new process. We're going to have to really live with it, and it will evolve. But yes, we have thought about that. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much. Katharina.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Claire, for the report. So I think this is a really, really important piece of work. Just by Police Scotland as well as by our auditors. So I really welcome the development, and I'm really quite keen. I think this is going to be one of those things where I'm really keen to kind of see how this process is going to be used in practice now that once it's up and running. And there's quite a few thoughts that I kind of have on it that I'm just going to try and kind of restrict it and phrase it, in terms of questions. But there's two critical things to me. One is the timing of the feedback, because again, in my experience, the legislative process can take a long period of time. So we just heard assurances from Wendy that it will be picked up. So the horizon scanning, it will be picked up at an early stage, because I think, again, the earlier an organisation starts engaging with a proposed piece of legislation, the more scope there is to really influence in an appropriate way, i.e. presenting facts and figures, so that but then it's also important to kind of stay with it throughout the course of the potential. So the time sticking with this, I suppose there is a question there somewhere as to how robust the process designed at the moment is, that's supporting and making sure that that, as I say, that is being provided over the whole course of the legislation. And the second kind of question, I suppose, again, I'm going to try and frame it as a question because I've got a view on this, is at the moment, it seems the way the internal audit report reads to me, and I haven't seen the process obviously in detail, is that the focus is primarily, it's looking primarily at financial impacts, but actually legislation impacts, in a much wider sense. And yes, of course, everything at some stage can potentially be tied down to pound kind of signs as to how much does it cost to do something. But quite often we see that legislation might have unintended consequences, ripple effects, etc. And I know that it's not Police Scotland's role necessarily to be, actively there influencing legislation, but I do think, there will be some insights that Police Scotland has that no other public body will have to that degree. And then, I would argue that it is very much in the public interest for Police Scotland to present facts and figures where they may be pertinent to the public discussion, potentially. So I know, that's my view. And again, I'm kind of thinking, to what degree does the process reflect that it's not just, I suppose, the financial impact, but there may be wider impacts as well of legislation. Sorry, two very long-winded questions. And I'm not sure if they're for Claire or for Wendy.
Yeah. Well, Wendy has her hand up, so we'll go to you.
Thanks, Chair. I don't want to steal Claire's thunder, so Claire, please pop in at any stage. It might be helpful for members. I appreciate I presented to the Resourcing Committee on the 19th of December in relation to this. It might be worthwhile just a little bit of context in terms of how this came about, if you don't mind, Chair. there were two asks of me set by Chief Constable and Deputy Chief Constable Graham. One was to introduce a process by which we could harness and corral new legislation coming into the organisation, but primarily it was from a financial perspective. So what we were not able to do, and apologies if there's an alarm going in the background here that's annoying people, but from a financial perspective, we were not able to articulate the cost of new legislation coming into Police Scotland from a cumulative point of view. And that was the driver, because then subsequently we were not putting forward any proposals in our financial submission on an annual basis as to the correct amount of money that we needed to bid for. So that was number one ask, was to establish a process to coordinate. And that's all it is, it's coordination tier. So it's not there to replace the assessment process that has always gone on in Police Scotland and seems to work very effectively. It was to bring in this coordination tier. And the second ask was to take a paper to the SPA Resources Committee, which, as I say, I did on the 19th of December. And I'm coming back on the 13th of March, no spoilers, but it was really to give more detailed feedback to the SPA around the cumulative financial impact. So, Katerina, the finances were really the driver and the motivation behind this. It may well evolve, and we're not ignoring anything else. As I say, there's an impact assessment for each lead. So the likes of Beck Smith, who's leading on domestic abuse, and the relevant legislation, she will do a full impact assessment that shapes that piece of legislation. That's not for me to get involved in it, but I'm there really as oversight of all of the asks of us at the time, and also that ongoing year-in cost associated. So in terms of answering your questions, Katerina, and I'm sorry for taking up airtime there, but absolutely, that monthly engagement. So I have monthly meetings now. The Legislative Oversight Group is what we've called it, the Scottish Government, and that allows that ongoing communication, two-way communication between ourselves around what's coming over the hill, what's on on the books now, and where can we influence, shape, and have those really honest discussions of not inappropriately shaping any kind of legislation, but being very realistic about what we can deliver and what we can't. There's also something for me about the tracking of the legislation, and the point you make around the time from consultation right through to implementation can be a very long time. So again, we've got that now. We're tracking that through this process and through the Legislative Review Group that sits under my oversight group. But we do have that focus on the financial impact. There's no doubt about that, taking into account those wider issues that you raise. But I think we have to start somewhere, and then this will evolve, and we'll see where it takes us. But and I think there is something for me, Chair, just around the timing of an internal audit, to be fair to Claire and the team. They came in as the process was being established, and I think that's probably impacted the value in terms of some of the recommendations. We've moved on considerably even since then. I've chaired two oversight groups now, and they are scheduled into the diary. So I think some of the recommendations very helpful. We've already implemented in terms of the ratification from finance. That's absolutely given. The financial breakdown template, we're actually now having an economic appraisal template developed by finance to support every lead. So again, really useful. But I think in terms of figures being presented, making sure they're sufficiently detailed, that's absolutely why we're doing this. So that's I hope that's helpful just in terms of background. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you very much, Wendy. That was helpful context in terms of the driver for putting this process in place. Now, Grant, you had your hand up, but Claire has also put her hand up, and I think she may want to deal with this point. So if yours is on a different point, will I come back to you, Grant?
It's actually on the point, following up what Wendy was saying. I confirm that we had a very good discussion at the Resources Committee in December about this. One of the things that we were keen to see was, although the actual assessments were coming from the different parts of Police Scotland, we wanted to be sure that the finance team at Police Scotland were able to pull this together in a consistent way, so that we actually got a way of not only looking at the information and preparing it in a consistent manner, but we've also then got a consistent way of monitoring whether the estimated time and cost actually was compared with what was experienced in the rollout of the legislation, because it will be part of our learning process. And Wendy is coming back to the Resources Committee in March with further thoughts as this is unfolded with interaction with finance.
Okay, thank you very much. Claire.
Yeah, just kind of furthering on what Wendy was saying, due to the timing of the review, like we wanted to look in detail at really how we would be able to assess the cumulative impact of legislation, but also follow legislation through the different stages and be influential and robust in what we're presenting at each stage. And I think through all the discussions that we had, we felt the process could deliver against that.
Yeah.
But just the stage of the audit we were at, we couldn't actually verify that and see it in operation. But one of the things I guess that we took some assurance from was that there's already a plan in place to evaluate the effectiveness of this project at intervals until it's fully embedded. So I think that will go a long way to improving it. And then Katerina, you also made a great point about the Police Scotland being in an ideal position really to identify things about new legislation that might have unintended impacts, consequences and things. That's a good point. I'm not sure this will fully address it, but from internal audit's point of view, when we made the point about the costing methodology, I guess part of our thinking for that was that we want that methodology to be something that drives thinking about different working practices that will be affected, different processes that may need to be amended, and to really get into that granular level of detail as a sort of double check that nothing is being missed in the analysis. So it was primarily, I guess, about being confident on the numbers, but you can't really be confident on the numbers without having gone through that thought process. So I think it will pick up on those areas that you asked questions about as well.
Thank you very much, Claire. Yeah, and Wendy, you wanted to come back in?
Yes, Chair, just on the back of the comments there around coming back in March, Grant, I think you'll be really reassured because I am at this time about the level of detail that we will be bringing back. I've had several meetings now with Lynn Markey, who's supporting this piece of work, and I'm really grateful to my finance colleagues because they have dedicated Lynn to this particular area for me. So she will be my consistent point of contact. She's done an astounding amount of work already to bring that consistency, common terminology, common understanding, and she has presented to me very thoroughly and comprehensively on the work that she has done so far. So I'm really reassured by it, and I hope to reassure members in March. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. We'll look forward to that in March. We'll all be tuning into the Resources Committee. I mean, I think one view of this is that this audit was slightly premature, given how new this new legislation process is. Another way of looking at it is that you're in at the beginning of the design and implementation of the project. So you got in early. You can support the development of this until it gives us as much value as we possibly can get from it. So thank you for the audit, Claire, and thank you very much for presenting the report. So we're ready to move on to the next item, which is item 3.2, the annual internal audit plan. And we're back to yourself, Claire, for this.
Yeah, so in the development of this plan, we have looked at relevant information on strategy, on risk, on performance. We've assessed previous coverage, risk assessed audit areas, and we've had extensive consultation with SPA, Police Scotland, HMICS, Audit Scotland, to come up with our long list, I guess, of audits for the 3-year period and our proposed coverage in year 1 of that period, which we've shown in detail in the report. So the high-level scope of the audits we propose carrying out in the year ahead start on page 9 of our report, which I think is page 21 of the submission. We will intend to cover a financial area in each year of the plan, and in this year we are suggesting that we look at the process surrounding grant receipts to make sure any expenditure against those is accurately recorded and used in accordance with the conditions and intended purpose. Also taking a look at a number of areas relating to people, so resourcing, scenario planning, including duty modifications is an area that we've picked up as being a high risk area, and we'll evaluate whether there's clear strategy and analysis there and an operating model to support the increase in duty modifications that have been seen and make sure that officers have suitable deployments. A review on equality and human rights impact assessments to make sure that these are being carried out by appropriately skilled, trained and equipped people, and that any outputs are appropriately quality assured. There's a chunky review, I guess, on change projects and realisation of benefits. This is an area that there are outstanding recommendations in and that will be really important going forward. We want to look at the control environment around managing change programmes, including assessing organisational capacity and capability to implement change, looking at change management processes applied, and a particular focus on the benefits tracking and realisation methodology that's being applied there. We've got a number of pieces of work in train that have recommendations around this area, so we'll be, I guess, building on what we've learned about the organisation and those reviews as we go forward into this next year. A risk management review to provide assurance over the risk management arrangements. A review on the crime operating system as one of the biggest IT projects which has been running for a number of years. We will look at doing a detailed review to understand whether the system is achieving the benefits it was intended to achieve and being used to its full capacity. Again, an audit of forensic services included each year of our plan, and for this one we'll look at performance management and reporting, evaluate how robust and effective that monitoring and reporting of performance is. And we're aware that there's been a number of estates risks flagged to us over the course of the year, so a detailed look at estates management. We'll assess the estate strategy, the plan and preventive maintenance programme and compliance monitoring arrangements around that, and assess whether any improvement plans or risk areas identified are being appropriately implemented and risks mitigated. We've also included a review of cash and drug productions in high value store. Again, it's an area that has an inherently higher risk and it hasn't been reviewed for a period of time. So that's the rationale for that one. And we are just about to start an IT general controls audit. This will give us a lot of detailed information about your kind of network and your IT controls. So we've included a placeholder here so that like any areas of particular risk that come up in that general review, we can have a more detailed look at in the year ahead. And then we'll just be doing our usual follow-up activity. There's also some contingency as per in previous years built into the plan in order that we can respond to any emerging risks throughout the year. The rest of this report shows various graphics and analysis to just indicate how we've developed our plans. So we've mapped our audit areas to your risks and to the excellence framework themes. We've shown the planned schedules of audits, included assurance mapping to demonstrate our efficiency considerations and avoidance of any duplication. And we've also included the detailed risk assessment against the audit universe. And that document there also gives early sight of the anticipating coverage in years 2 and 3 of this 3-year audit plan. But of course, risks and priorities will change in that period, so it'd be unlikely that those end up being all of the audits that we carry out. We will be refreshing this during at points through this year and when we come to draft next year's plan too. So that's all I plan to say on this, but happy to take any kind of questions or comments on it.
Okay, thank you, Claire. Before I open it up for questions, I wonder, John, if you wanted to say something about Appendix A and the SPA's overview of this planning process.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Probably just a few comments from a very comprehensive update from Claire. I suppose from herself, it's just worth reminding, internal audit is one of the core functions of the authorities. So we have responsibility for delivering that level of assurance to you, to the RAC members, and to Lynn as accountable officer to help inform our annual governance statement. And that's really covered within the excellence framework, which Claire spoke about. So that's our key third line of defence, as we call it, internal audit. And we've chosen to outsource that provision to BDO. And so that's our own strategy for how we develop internal audit. And we've had a very robust planning process, which has been a bit different this year. It's the first year that BDO have been involved in the detailed planning. So they have their own audit methodology and planning process that we've had to follow. Like Claire's mentioned, we've made sure we've got lots of consultation across the board, looking at really where our risks are, what our emerging trends are from some of the committee discussions, as well as just areas that we haven't looked at for a while, which you can see in the plan. Overall, really, just to conclude from myself, I think we're very content from the authority that there's been a robust process again this year. We've addressed risk and we've got good coverage across different areas. I think it was mentioned earlier, we tried to have a good balance within the risk radar of looking at preparedness. So not just internal audit being reactive to things that have already happened in this year. That's quite important. I think we try to move to a place where internal audit is always adding value rather than necessarily just telling us maybe what we already know. So we try to get a good balance across looking at different audit areas. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, John. I mean, that last point resonates very much with me. I think it's really important that as much as possible we get support in terms of preparedness and planning rather than always just looking backwards. So thank you for that. And thank you, Claire, for the presentation as well. So we have a question, I think, or a comment from Grant.
Yeah. Thank you, Mary. Claire, thank you very much. That was a very comprehensive summary of the various steps that are taken all the way through to prepare the plan. And I think you're covering pretty well every angle from I can think of. There was one I just wanted to clarify in relation to what's topical elsewhere. One of the things that I always have a look at is to see the sort of reports that Audit Scotland are producing in different areas. And I noticed just before Christmas that they produced a report on some concerns at the Water Industry Commissioner. And I wonder if, as part of your analysis of all the areas to look at, are you sort of looking at these sort of areas to get ideas of what's cropped up elsewhere to be able to incorporate it, if appropriate, into your own plans?
Yeah, we definitely do take, I guess, cognizance of the kind of key themes and things that come up. But I think in case of the water industry one, that's probably one that's quite unique to that organisation, whereas there's others in terms of like IT security vulnerabilities and things, which we very much built into our forward planning because they are recurring at a number of public sector organisations. They become more of a target. So it does. Our initial work that we conducted in financial controls this year didn't give rise to any particular concerns around financial control areas. So it's not something, expenses and travel is not something that was flagged to us as something we need to put more effort into for this organisation. However, there does remain those contingency days. So if it was an area that you wanted us to spend some time on, there is the option to do that. But it isn't something that I feel I've got any indication of there being a risk in that area.
No, thank you. For the avoidance of doubt, I was not suggesting that there was a problem. I was just really looking at it in the broader aspects of what's topical elsewhere, because when something crops up in one public body, there's obviously a question of was it unique to that body, or is it has a wider potential application, and things like cyber controls and expenditure overruns on programs are things that keep hitting the headlines from time to time, and it's just how you keep an eye on these things and adapt the plan as appropriate if necessary. Thank you.
Thank you, Grant. Are there any other comments or questions on this internal audit plan? Nothing else? Okay, Claire, can I just ask, within the areas that you have, is this plan deliverable?
Yes, that's something obviously that when we're drafting the plan, we put a lot of thought into, like the budget available, and had there been more budget, we would certainly have come up with more areas that would be useful to look at. But I think we're content that this is good coverage and an appropriate budget to achieve that coverage and deliverable within the time that we've got.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Okay, then I think we're finished with this item. Thank you for that. I'm going to suggest that since we're making good progress through the agenda, we take a 10-minute comfort break. Sorry, John wants to come in. Are you objecting to the comfort break, John?
No, not at all. Karen's probably going to say the same point. We are asking members to approve this plan, so we are
Yes.
looking for a decision.
Yes, thanks, John. Yes, this needs to be approved if we're comfortable to do so for submission to the authority. So thank you for
No.
So that you approve this, it's within the
Yes.
RAC committee's terms of reference now.
You're getting me confused now. I'm doing a perfectly good enough job of that myself. Thanks, John. Yes. So is everybody content to approve the plan? Thank you very much, and to approve a 10-minute comfort break. Okay, we'll see you back here at 25 to 12. Thank you. grab a cup of tea or a cup of coffee. And we can start again at item 4.1 is the ICO audit of Police Scotland, and the recommendation action tracker there. And we have DCC Spears, I think. Yes.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Chair, for that. I'm going to just again make one or two comments, and then I'm going to invite Kerry Harvey just to say a little bit more. So Kerry is my technical expert within Police Scotland, leading all matters in relation to data protection. So this is the first audit of this nature that's been done in a considerable period of time, and personally I can't reflect on a similar audit in my time. So you will see from the audit that they looked in two specific areas around governance and accountability, and then in our personal data breaching space. And the recommendations that they have made are very much sort of technical and tactical adjustments that we have to make. You also see from the reports, and there are two here, that the deadlines that we have imposed are self-selected, and I'm really committed to actually delivering on those recommendations in the really short term. So we will deliver a lot of those quickly. We've already started to do that, and in any case, our intention would be to be concluded, but within the first half of the next financial year. On that point, I'll probably just turn to Kerry, if you're okay, and she'll maybe just draw out a bit more detail from this and the next report, if that's okay. It might be that we take the two of them together, Chair.
Yes, if that makes sense. Yes, we can do that, but we'll hear from Kerry on this one first. Thank you. Sounds like you've got an easy job, Kerry.
Yes, morning everybody. Thanks for
Morning.
introduction, DCC. Just before I refer to the updates, I've got a couple of points to draw out from the last meeting in November. One, Mr McRae had raised the issue of the priority ratings awarded by ICO at the last meeting, and specifically what the difference between urgent and high priority was. So I've included those within the key for reference and to clarify understanding, and I apologise for omitting those from the November report. I've also included a timeline which highlights when the report was published and ICO's framework for review and sign off on completion, because I believe that differs slightly from arrangements with HMICS and internal audit. So it was just for an overview of that. As Mr Spears already commented, the timelines within the action plan are self-imposed by Police Scotland to focus our activity, with the drop-dead deadline for completion of all recommendations being September 24, or this year, sorry, forget it's 2024 now. The report was published in September last year, and following that I requested a meeting in December with the lead auditor to discuss the planned activity for November and December, just to make sure that it was going to land properly. And I also took the opportunity to further clarify a few of those recommendations which will be discharged in March. We did discuss the recommendations which have interdependencies with additional resource and capacity against the backdrop that we have now of VR, VER and finance position within Police Scotland and some of the issues that presents. I'm currently preparing for the interim follow-up and will submit our updated action plan and evidence on the 19th of February, which will include a progress update, which has kind of evolved a bit from this update, with evidence of activity, and a meeting will follow that round about the week commencing 4th of March, but that's still to be determined. Turning to the update itself, there were 25 recommendations, some with multiple actions within, in focus for the period, and you'll appreciate that this is a snapshot in time submitted for this meeting. 21 of those related to the governance audit strand, 2 recommendations were closed and 6 were pending approval at Data Governance Board. The board took place last Thursday, and those 6 recommendations are now also closed. 4 have been delayed as there is an additional resource dependency and were discussed at Data Governance Board. A further meeting scheduled with ACC and DCC professionalism to look at options for resolution for those ones, and they also impact, as John just referenced, the recommendations that were jointly received. I suppose you could phrase it by SPA in relation to records of processing activity. So we're keen to resolve those, and the fact that they are prioritised as urgent and high by ICO. Excuse me, sorry, that's tickling my throat today. There are 9 listed as activity progressing, which can be evidence all actions haven't yet concluded or there was a dependency delaying. Since the submission of this report, 3 of those have now also been discharged. So in summary, at the point in time of submission of this report, 11 recommendations were completed and can be discharged, and 10 were in progress with evidence of activity undertaken, but there remained further work to discharge. The second strand of that audit was in relation to the personal data breach reporting, of which there was 9 recommendations in total. 4 of those recommendations were the focus of activity during the period, and 1 recommendation was partially closed following the Data Governance Board last week. The reason it's partial is because there was 2 actions associated with that recommendation. One was that we created a review schedule for policies and SOPs, etc., which has been completed, and to update the policy and SOP itself. So the schedule is clearly in place, but the policy and SOP are currently in the process of being updated, and that will be discharged when new versions of those are published. 3 of the recommendations had activity progressed and can be evidenced, but I was unable to discharge completely at the time of this report. 2 of those related to training compliance, and the same recommendations were received for this in the governance and audit stream. The issue with this one is we have controls in place, both proactive and reactive, but our current figure for mandatory data protection refresher training sits at 69%, where our own compliance threshold is 80%. There has been a new development in our scope system, which will introduce a visual in and out of competency view for all employees, but that's not been implemented yet, so I've not been able to assess the impact of that control quite yet. The final element relates to a new entry to the records retention SOP, which was purely a timing issue. The records retention SOP has just gone through mandatory consultation and was published at the end of January, and now we've just pushed through an update to have an additional line put into that and then published again, and that will be discharged once that's published. So the action plan has moved on quite a bit since this submission, with activity progressing against all the recommendations. The additional 27 are in flight, and that can be evidenced in the submission to ICO on the 19th. It's anticipated that all the medium recommendations will be discharged. Update of activity is all that's required for those recommendations, and those that have an urgent and high recommendation will have evidence of activity provided, which will result either in their discharge of a number of those actually, with the remaining being the focus of our activity over the coming months leading to September. So I hope that input has been helpful, but I'm happy to take any comments, or if there's any requirement for stylistic changes, also happy to look at those as well. Thank you.
Yes, very helpful, Kerry. Thank you very much. It's good to be able to see this laid out this way. Can I ask if any members have questions or comments? Paul.
Yeah, just to be clear, this is on 4.1 and 4.2.
I'm going to come back on the mobile phone extraction one. Sorry,
that's fine. I'll hold my questions for 4.2.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Grant. Grant, sorry, you're muted.
Sorry, my apologies. That's the second time today. Kerry, thank you very much for a very comprehensive report, and thank you for clarifying my query from an earlier time. I noticed that on slide 2, you had an informal discussion with the ICO in December, engagement positive and so on. Just in overall terms, are they happy with the actions that you're proposing and the timelines? Because I just wanted to be clear that if they were if their expectation was different, how the two reconciled.
Yeah, absolutely. No, understood. So yes, they're happy with it. So the purpose of the meeting in December was to highlight the activity we planned for November and December, and also allowed me an opportunity to question further some of the recommendations, just to ensure that the granularity of my own understanding was understood, etc. So a bit of back and forth in respect to that, and as you might expect, a bit of challenge from me in terms of some of the recommendations that I think go above and beyond the legislative requirements, but I'm sure you'll appreciate, as the regulator for data protection legislation in the UK, we set a very high bar. So essentially the action plan was agreed with ICO, and our self-imposed timelines were also agreed, with the sort of prize at the end being the September, if you like, for completion of all the activity. So essentially when we meet in March, what they'll look at is progress of activity and evidence of activity against those urgent and high risks. The medium risks, they're happy just to walk through the updates. I'll naturally also have evidence for those as well. But yeah, they're satisfied. And you know, December was a sort of a marker just to sort of formulate our own response to make sure it lands properly, etc. But I do communicate with ICO on a weekly basis, just round about things that pop up when you're sort of developing an option for a recommendation remediation that you think, hang on a second. So we have a good relationship in that regard. So thanks.
Right, thank you. So is it reasonable to assume that, I know you've got some challenges to get resources allocated, and you touched on the impact of VR, VER, and so on. If you have any challenges coming through about being able to deliver by September, I would hope that these would be sort of reported back to us.
Absolutely.
So that we don't end up with ICO coming along after September and saying, you promised to do such and such and you haven't done it.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. So and also not only this board, but also I will keep ICO an advance notification of anything that I think that we are in fear of not being able to complete, if that makes sense, well in advance. I would personally never leave that to the lastminute.com. So so absolutely, thanks.
Right. Okay, thank you very much. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, I think operating on the basis of no surprises would be a good idea on this one. So
yes, absolutely.
That would be helpful if you could keep us and ICO advised. I wonder if you can help me out here, Kerry. There's a reference on page 7, slide 7, to 3 recommendations that are delayed pending decision of the resource maximisation group. Could you explain for me what the role and remit of that group is?
Well, I think the name of that group might have changed because it was being formed at the time when I put that in, and Mr. Spears might be able to step in and say what that is. But essentially, for some of those recommendations that were round about the records of processing activity, we had an additional post advertised and a successful applicant attained for that in the records management space. And given the individual was new to the organisation, didn't already have a portfolio as such, we were going to dedicate the royal we. We're going to dedicate that resource 100% of the time to the recommendations round about the records of processing activity. But obviously, things changed, a very fast-paced landscape in terms of VR, VER, resourcing, finances, etc. So that's posted sort of on hold at this moment in time, and that's probably my understanding of that. Mr. Spears might be able to give further update just in terms of that group.
This is a sort of gatekeeper for new appointments.
Yes, yes.
When there's normally a presumption against that at this stage. Yeah,
yes,
okay, that's helpful. Alan, did you want to come in there?
Yeah, just to clarify, the resource maximisation work that we're doing is a newly formed people board. So as you know, we've been undertaking some review of governance arrangements in Police Scotland. So this will be the people board that I will chair, supported by the work that Katie Miller is doing. And one element of that will just be looking at the movement of people within and out of the organisation, both police officers and police staff.
Yeah, thank you very much. That makes sense. And I suppose the final question for you is, are you confident that all actions will be able to be completed by September?
Yes, I am. Unless so, I'm confident providing the additional resource is attained. For those that it's not, we may have a trickier scenario. Obviously, the impact of VR, VER, etc. might have a service design impact, and those will be considered. At this stage, it's still quite early, but I will be intimating those issues to ICO as part of the September submission as well at this point in time, and really just monitoring that. I wouldn't really like to leave that past June, if I'm honest, in terms of having a resolution, and that's what the meeting that's scheduled for 2 weeks, I think, today with ACC professionalism, to look at what other options in the event that doesn't come to fruition, what other options can we look at and address to discharge those recommendations, because as you might imagine, we're very keen to discharge them all by the September deadline.
And we'd be very keen to see them all discharged then too. So thank you very much. Wish you luck with that then. Anybody got any further comments or questions on this one? If not, then we're moving to 4.2, which is the mobile phone data extraction project. And that also you, Kerry?
Yes, sorry.
No, not at all.
So I think I kind of briefly introduced this at the last meeting and advised that the report had just landed with Police Scotland. In respect to this one, the terms of reference stated that the organisations involved in the project would be kept confidential, so the reports have not been published by ICO, although the project outcomes report will be published soon, which will have the overview of findings and key themes, etc. And that they've not been able to give a definitive date on that, but I spoke to the auditor on Friday just to see if they were still on track with that being imminent, and the answer is yes. The audit recommendations associated with the last audit have now been discharged or are superseded by these recommendations, and for action has been updated accordingly to reflect that. So you should see those sort of changing on the overall audit input in Donna's slides. As part of the review, Police Scotland received 13 continuous improvement recommendations, which I've summarised, and with exception to the first recommendation, these will be managed by the implementation group, which met for the first time on the 17th of January and meets every third Wednesday thereafter. The team is focused on the delivery of the activities, and the team comprises of myself, the information manager for assurance, and a number of colleagues from digital forensics. In respect of the joint Police Scotland Crown Office recommendation, I met with the Crown Office on Friday last week and await details of their SPOC, who will assist in the development and implementation of a joint controller agreement, which is what that recommendation is about. The second recommendation, or summarised recommendation, is with regard to policies and procedures. Those have been reviewed and redundant information has been removed from our intranet space. The process of completion of data processing notices and the provision of these to victims and witnesses is systemic within the organisation. The evidence is also in place to support that, and that the Gateway refuses any extraction request forms without the data processing notice. However, the recommendation has been received because it's not formally documented within the procedures that we are doing that. The third recommendation is in relation to the current training provision. Previously, the training has not been a requirement for investigative officers because they don't carry out the process of extraction, but we accepted that because we understand the sort of holistic view that the investigating officer has to have of all the moving parts within there. The current training inputs that we have are supplied by the cyber kiosk vendors themselves, and as a consequence of that, they're largely focused on the technology and how to operate it, as opposed to any sort of wider data protection considerations, etc. So we're developing further internal guidance which will incorporate those elements, and we're already looking at toolkit videos, etc. for deployment within that community. The final point is a recommendation that was received in the governance audit stream. It seeks to ensure basically that the end-to-end processing is captured for all high-risk activities. That's the ROPA recommendations that John touched on earlier as well. This is a resource interdependency, as we've just discussed, and that further discussion will take place with ACC professionals in regards options and how we resolve that moving forward. I've provided a summarised breakdown of all the 13 recommendations for reference within the pack, and I can update that there has been activity progressed against 2 of those recommendations. They both have a January timescale, and these are pending discharge because at this moment in time the work has been done. I'm just waiting for the publication of the documents, and they're in the pipeline with policy support for publication. If members require, I can provide progress updates to the next meeting using the same model as the previous update, if that's helpful, and I'll just pause there and thanks and ask any questions.
Thank you, Kerry. Yes, Paul, you indicated earlier you wanted to come in here.
And sorry about that, because I thought we'd conflated the two together, but that's okay.
We nearly did.
Yeah, a couple of areas I just wanted to tease out a little bit. The first is 1.5, the terms of reference for the project being kept confidential and not published. Can I ask why that is? And also, does that mean that as an audit committee meeting in private, we couldn't have those terms of reference shared with us?
So the reason for it was the review was at the request of MPCC, and the terms of reference that they agreed on was that the participants in the review would remain anonymous with only the reports finding. However, we took the view that from Police Scotland's perspective there was nothing contentious or unsafe for this environment, being a public environment, etc., that we wouldn't want to share through, transparency and openness. So that's why we were quite content to submit our own. Appreciate every other constabulary who's been involved in this report will have their own view on that. But that was Police Scotland's position.
Great. No, thanks very much for that. Second question I've got is about recommendations and timescales. Are you confident that the recommendations will be delivered within the timescales, and also what future reporting are you planning to this committee in future about the recommendations on this report? On the mobile phone ICO report,
Yeah, sure. So in terms of the recommendations, we spent quite a considerable amount of time. When I say we, I'm talking about the Digital Forensics Chief Superintendent and a couple of inspectors in there as well, just round about the workload versus, the daily workload and business as usual, and also the interdependencies for some recommendations with public protection portfolio, for example. Some of these recommendations sort of tie into the public protection space naturally as well. So I have resource from there also attending the implementation group. So we spent quite a considerable time thinking through the periods for discharge, and those were agreed as not being problematic. But as with the previous input, that they are a watching brief, and that's why we meet on a monthly basis and I record any sort of slippage, etc., through our 4 action, and naturally would escalate those if I thought there was a sort of real fear of us not being able to deliver. The same with the last input, though, from an IPO's perspective, these are self-imposed timescales, and providing we can demonstrate activity against those and close off a number of them by the period of the year, they'll be content with that because they are continuous improvement activities as opposed to non-compliance areas. But happy to report back in the similar format to the previous one, if that makes sense. And also, if useful, I'm happy to submit copies of the updates to ICO as well, if that's helpful.
Thanks very much for that, Kerry.
Thank you. Yes. So if there's anybody else wishes to come in? If not, thank you, Alan and Kerry, for the report, and we look forward to updates and assurances around the ICO's levels of satisfaction. So thank you very much. Item 4.3 is the HMICS inspection, SPA's validated self-assessment update, and that's Lynn, please.
Thank you, Chair. So thank you. So HMICS, under the remit, have a requirement to look at the effectiveness and efficiency of the SPA within a 3-year period, every 3 years. The last time they carried out their inspection was 2019. It was a very detailed report. In terms of going forward, they have decided that for this review, they're going to look at a validated self-evaluation. They set out terms of reference to us in December, which was the basis of the validated self-evaluation. We have provided to them 3 main, what I call pillars, which is the best value work, which is comparing the SPA against the best value of the accountable officer framework, and that came to ARAC at a previous meeting. We've also submitted to them detailed work around board and member development, and also detailed work around what we call the narrative around our improvement journey. They have started their field work, in fact, today. We have regular meetings with HMICS to follow up on additional information they're looking for, any feedback they might have. The intention is that they will complete their work. They're considering it to be short and sharp, and they'll complete their work hopefully in March with a report thereafter. In terms of it being an HMICS report, the report will be published as a report for the Parliament, because it comes from the inspector. And thereafter, I would be proposing that the authority invite Mr. Naylor to present his report to the authority. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lynn. Yes, we've been receiving versions of the self-assessment over recent months as that's been being pulled together. So that's now been sent off along with the other material you mentioned about board and member development and the improvement journey. So I suppose the whole process is kicking off now, and as you say, it will end with a presentation from Mr. Naylor on the findings of the audit, or the inspection. Audit? No, inspection.
Inspection.
So yeah. So yeah, we're at the sort of kick-off point now. Does any member have any comments or questions on that? Anybody else wish to come in? Okay, well, a few of us,
Chair,
I think.
Mr. Eadie.
Paul, sorry. Paul, you're muted.
Apologies, I pressed the wrong hand up thing. I'd done it on my PDF reader. It was just further down this, and this is 4.3 that we're looking at, and it was, if I could find it, sorry, it's the bit about one of the recommendations in here, or A3, on page or slide, as you say, 10 of 35 and 10 and 11. I'm on the right item here, yeah?
No. 4.3 is
Monroe.
the HMICS inspection.
Yeah, that's what I've got under my papers. 4.3 to
it's only four pages.
4 pages, right? Oh gosh.
That's why you've got us confused with slide 35.
Yeah, it's the audit. No, it's not the audit. Right.
Can I maybe share that's in your briefing note? Maybe it's in the briefing note, and that might be what's been submitted. Maybe that's what you're looking at. The actual report on the agenda in public is only the report.
It's my highlights. Then I picked up something. It doesn't matter. Apologies. I'll get my ducks in a row.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Okay, so we're simply noting that this is starting now, and we'll have further updates and the conclusion. Do we know when that would be, Lynn, when we expect to hear back?
Yeah, I think HMICS, if it goes as they would like, I think they're intending to report pretty quickly. My expectation would be the report would be finished before the next full audit committee.
Before me?
Before ARAC, I would hope, but obviously that's up to the HMICS in terms of how they want to deliver. So I don't expect an update back. I expect by that point we should have a full report, I hope.
That's helpful, yeah. Okay, thank you very much. So the next item then, item 5, is the committee's work plan. This is obviously a dynamic document that we rely on Karen to keep updated. It shows an awful lot of reports coming to the May meeting, the 9th of May, but we've already discussed the potential for there to be an additional meeting between now and May to take some of that into different sessions. So with that as a caveat, that we will have another meeting probably end of March, beginning of April, we can hopefully approve this work plan now. Yep. Okay. So that concludes the public business. We have a couple of items under private business. So I suggest we stop for 5 minutes to allow the live